Okay, everybody, my favorite guest, Dr. Dave Maloley, my really, really good friend. For a podcast episode 100, there's no better person I wanted to talk to than you. Like, I was ecstatic to get you on the number 100. How you doing, Dave?
Well, first of all, congratulations. Like that's no small feat. I think most podcasts don't make it past 10, and
Yeah,
100 is immediate elite. And you and I always have fantastic conversations, so I'm stoked as well.
yeah. Well, first of all, thanks to my mom and my wife for listening, and a couple of really good friends. So it stays in a small circle. I don't think it's blowing up like yours. So I just do it for fun. And my marketing team is like, we should stop doing it because nobody cares. I'm like, but I get to talk to fun people.
I don't think that's true.
Can I still
Most,
do it like just for me?
yeah, there's so much yield. The network, the listeners, it's just so high leverage. It's hard to beat.
Yeah. Yeah.
The clips I
Dave,
see on
just
social media are really great.
you and I met 2017 at the Voices of Dentistry, the first one. I still remember sitting on that couch with you.
Yeah, yeah.
That was incredible.
I wouldn't know you without a podcast.
I know, right? That would have been
Yeah.
like so sad. I remember your story, and I remember like talking with you. Every time we get together, we'll talk for a long time,
Yeah.
right? And then just
Mm.
to get to know each other. Then I visited you like with your house in Colorado, which was really incredible. And I think it's all kind of leading up to the book that you're writing, if I'm not mistaken. And so I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the book that you're about to finish and what's the premise of the book, or what led you to write that book. Because it's not your
Oh
first book.
man, it's a long journey. Really, the more I coached in dentistry, the more I realized it was all boiling down to a few principles. And to put it in the most simple form, it was the intersection between optimized human beings and elite entrepreneurship. So I've been exploring that intersection for a long period of time. And the more curious I got about it, the more I unpacked of this is the future of leadership, because it combats so many of the issues of anxiety, depression, disengaged teams, quiet quitting, all the issues that people have in their culture. It resolves that issue. And what we do know already, it's no surprise, is that the old school, like command and control, compliant leadership, top down, hasn't worked for a long time. And I think COVID really exposed that when people kind of got reset to their own values. And so flow-driven leadership is the book that I'm currently writing. It's meant for an audience. Actually, originally it was meant for a dental audience. And I was like, this is a bigger idea than just in dentistry. It's more for a mainstream entrepreneurial audience. So I recently shifted it to a more of a mainstream audience. And the thing that I'm most excited about is that I can make it non-theoretical, meaning the principles in the book are evidence-based, meaning essentially undeniable. If you apply it in this way, it will work. As long as you're working with human beings, it works. And I think there's so much fluff and fantasy and business and leadership. We have to distill it down to like, what do human beings yearn for? What motivates them? What keeps them engaged? And, I think a paycheck and a compensation package gets them enrolled, but doesn't keep them engaged. So what is the trend line? How do we keep them continuing to grow so the business flourishes, but also they don't start to wonder, is the grass greener somewhere else in another organization? So it is a prescription that I could have used maybe 15 years ago in my own dental practice. It's a prescription that I think people aren't really latching on to the modern way of leadership appropriately, and it's causing lots of pain. And the more I explored it, the more I realized that it's not industry specific. It's really, we're in a
Human
new age
specific.
post-COVID, and people are yearning for workplaces that they don't hate. And so it's to give the right type of entrepreneur a competitive advantage.
When you look at the title, like flow driven leadership, what do you think people get wrong? Well, what misconceptions people might have about the book?
Well, intentionally flow driven is a bit of a yin yang, like a paradoxical, because flow means kind of with peace and ease. There's some effortlessness inherent to the term flow. And then driven is the opposite. But what I'm talking about is that when you're in a flow state, you can be up to 5 times more productive. It's an absence of distraction where time distorts, and you enjoy the results because you're so productive, but you also enjoy the process. And so that's what the term really means. And I think people, like if I asked you when's the last time you were in the zone, you could probably give me an answer where you're like, oh, wow, it's been 2 hours. But what people don't fully understand is that you can do that with groups too. And you see it like maybe yesterday, if you watch football, there was a team that had I'm talking hypotheticals, but when everything sinks and you have that 2-minute drive and you're like, wait, they didn't move the ball like that the whole game and then they could do it in the last 90 seconds. That's usually group flow. So it's a kind of a mysterious and magical state, but it is the state of optimal performance. And I'm noticing that a lot of these sports psychologists that have traditionally worked in athletics are now shifting over to corporate because big business understands that there's a big ROI when all their humans are optimized.
That is so cool. Can you give an example besides, like, what would that look like in dentistry?
I think if we're talking specifically about, well, let me talk about individual flow and group flow. Individual flow would be, let's say a dentist books a big case. There's not enough room on their schedule. So they come in on Friday. It's maybe a receptionist, an assistant, and the doctor. They're not doing any hygiene checks. And they do this masterful work. Maybe it's a big surgery case or an aesthetic case. And they're like, wow, it's been a long time since I've enjoyed dentistry that much. Not only did I enjoy the process, the results were phenomenal. And their hand kind of goes into autopilot because they're operating. It's called hypotransient frontality. The frontal lobe just kind of shuts down and you just do it. You're one with the process. You're one with the art, or in this case, the treatment plan. That would be a really good example of an individual inflow. And the key there would be minimizing distractions. The other key would be that there's a balance between challenge and skill. If you've done it a million times, like an occlusal on number 30, you kind of get bored with it, and therefore you're not challenged. And it's like you can actually do poor work even though you've done it a million times. So you need a fair amount of challenge, which in a dental practice, it could be in a clinical setting, it could be do it faster, do it a more high quality. You need to up the ante a little bit. That'd be a really good example of individual flow. Group flow, I would say the common denominator that is commonly referred to in the research as blending egos. For example, in my practice, we had a rule. If you're going to clock in, that means you checked your ego at the door. And what that meant in practice is that I'm going to diminish my needs for the sake of the team. And the paradox there is that when I give, I actually receive more. And when I take, I inadvertently receive less. So there's a little bit of trust fall and say, like, I got your back and you got mine. But high-performing teams have that blending of egos where they stop thinking of the front and the back or the hygienist and the assistant. And they're like, okay, I can see that this hygienist is running behind. I'm going to help them turn over their room because it's not about my schedule. It's about our schedule. It's not about my production. It's about what does this day look like when done and done well. So those would be two really strong examples of flow done right in a dental practice.
Can I share with you one of the, I guess, flow in a team environment examples?
Yeah.
I went to one of my clients in San Antonio 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and it was Saturday, and the doctor texted me. He's like, yeah, we're doing surgery. It's only me and my assistant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, can I just stop by and take a picture? Yeah, just come in. The door's open, everything's open. Just come in and we're doing surgery. So I come in. They're blasting Metallica.
Yeah.
You know, the patient is like completely out, right? So they're like
Sedated,
under
yeah.
the anesthesia. And I think they had a anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
And then they're doing full arch.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the doctor didn't even like see me. So I talked to assistant because an assistant was like, he's in the zone. Like he's so out of this whole thing. Like don't bother even talking because he's just not going to be like, he's in the zone.
Yep.
And I'm like, how long is it going to be? They're like, probably 8 hours. I'm like, are you going to take a break? No, we just go for the whole 8 hours. They're like 6 hours or whatever that was. Right.
Yeah.
So like, and I sit And I'm like, oh my God, that is so cool. And you look at the room, they sit up properly, everything is there. It is so much fun.
Yeah.
Is that an example?
It's a perfect example. And there's an element of playfulness there. It's like, I think of flow. There's a quote that I love, and I'm gonna misrepresent the quote, so I'll just give you the big idea is that my goal is to blend the lines between work and play, and I'll let somebody else decide whether I'm working or playing. And in that case, you're just in the pocket. Like I just watched a documentary about the night that Kobe Bryant scored 81, and he just took over the game. Like there weren't 10 people on that court. There was one person, and the rest were extras. That's what you're talking about, is flow personified for sure.
That is so cool.
Results go up. He's going to do the best dentistry ever. And that 8 hours may seem like 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And nothing matters in that time
Nothing.
window.
No.
Yeah. It is so cool. But for some reason, when you describe flow-driven leadership, maybe for some people it could come out as like rah-rah kind of thing. Kumbaya, let's, drink kombucha together and decide what we do next. Like, and it's probably not that, right?
No, it's the opposite of that. Because what you're talking about is extrinsic motivation. I watched a cool YouTube video. I get pumped up. That fire burns very bright, but then it's a flash, right? What we're talking about is something that's sustainable, because the one thing that's not evident in a lot of workplaces right now is the well-being of the people. And so flow-driven leadership would be more like an athlete, where you understand you're going to work, but you also need rest cycles. You need recovery cycles. And what does active recovery look like? So it's anything but that. And that's where you have to be hyper individualized, because what makes me curious and makes me come alive may not make you curious and make you come alive. And that's why I see in dentistry sometimes businesses are over systemized. And I'm not anti-system, but the system should be loose enough that eventually the team member has the power to optimize the system for themselves. I do a fair amount of work with Kolbe, and Kolbe is your striving instinct. And a fact finder is going to want to research first. I want to brainstorm first. I'm a 9 quick start. And if you make me research first, you'll never engage me in the project. However, I mean, before I really understood this methodology, like I would get so irritated because my team wouldn't brainstorm with me. Not that they wouldn't, they just couldn't. It's not their operating system. And so, I think systems are really good training grounds, but then it should be the employee that's operating the system to continue to optimize. And that's where growth happens, because you're respecting their autonomy and mastery, which are their flow triggers, their internal motivators. And because you're giving them that trust, they're improving your business, and you're allowing them to own their zone. So, you can have an under-systemized practice, but you can also have an over-systemized practice. And I would consider over-systemizing when you disengage a human being, because now they're like a robot on an assembly line.
Where do you think that over-systemized is coming from? Because I do agree, it feels like a lot of dental practices acting like large corporations when it's really 15, 20 people in the team.
Yep.
So I'm curious, what do you think on that?
I think that's how we're trained. I mean, clinically, everything we have has a protocol, and you're going to develop your sequence of instrumentation and burrs, and depending on the procedure, and it just works. But within that, you have to craft solutions that sometimes are slightly off script. So there's no way in dentistry like that you can just stick with the game plan, because sometimes the caries is deeper than it looks like on the x-ray and on. I mean, you're just throwing curveballs all day long. And so is your team. So I think that's the way that we're trained. And a dental skill set and entrepreneurial skill set are parallel, but they're they're unalike. And so you have to develop them as distinct skill sets that complement one another, and not, because in dentistry, we're taught to isolate teeth. Well, if you isolate people, it doesn't work so well. If you don't humanize the person and realize that their Monday may not be like their Tuesday, and if something's going on at home or with their parents that they might not be at their best. Like, you have to be very agile, and that rigid structure works in some capacities in a dental practice, and it'll ruin you in other capacities. So it's understanding that we're playing multiple games simultaneously and not trying to apply the same standards to all elements of the business.
I have a lot where I want to go with this. What do you think the biggest challenge for a dentist when they listen to you? Take an average type A dentist. She or he finished dental school at the top of the class, with all the accolades. And now they listen to you and they're struggling. What do you think is the main reason, or what is the struggle?
For a typical dental practice owner?
Yeah.
One, they're unclear on who they are and where they're headed. And then that by default, they're not adamant about the destination. And so what ends up happening is they end up being in a people pleaser mode when as a business owner, you really have to be assertive. This is who we are. This is where we're headed. This is what we celebrate. This is what we don't tolerate. And within that framework, those are the rules of the game. They can have their autonomy. But if you don't create that frame for them, then it's like, I sometimes use the metaphor of like, hey, you played Monopoly before, you understand the game of Monopoly.
Oh, yeah.
But what if you'd never seen the game or you'd never read the rules, and I just plopped that in front of your family and said, have fun. And you're like, there's green houses, there's red houses, there's pink money, there's a shoe, like, you'd have no idea.
There's railroad.
Yeah. But it's fun once you understand the rules of the game. If you had to make it up, you'd never begin, because it would just be this big debate. And I think that's where dentists are stuck, is that they're like, okay, I hired this hygienist, I have to make her happy. She's seeing a patient that we have to make them happy. And then once you fall into that trap of everything to everyone, you're nothing to no one. And you're the one that can't sleep at night and is anxious simply because you're not clear of who you are and where you're headed and the rules of the game that's being played in your practice.
Yeah. I see
Because
a lot
people really
actually.
respect it when you plant a flag and say, this is what we're all about.
Yeah.
You might get
think
some resistance, but you won't get disrespect.
Which resistance is good, right?
It's normal. Humans hate to change.
I wonder, you work with a lot of people. I wonder, why do you think the generation of dentists, let's just say younger than 40, is struggling with the tension and disagreement, like a healthy disagreement?
Well, I think we live in a unhealthy society right now, and I don't think leadership has ever been harder. There's some strain there, and it's a strain in a place where dentists aren't usually, they avoid it as opposed to lean into it. So part of it's their own doing, where they haven't created a clear vision, core values in which to anchor the people. So if that's the case, then you have to break every tie. You have to be the referee. You have to applaud all the good things that happen and condemn all the bad things that happen because you haven't established the rules. But I think underneath that, the foundation is that dentists traditionally are really kind and generous people, which means they're non-confrontational. They just kind of want things to work. And I'm not confrontational, but I am pretty good at knowing which battles I have to win. And when you make those few, you win most of the battles. So yeah, I think it's an aversion to confrontation. When I look at a typical dentist that's introvert, intellectual, that's not a combative type. If anything, they lean more towards passive or passive aggressive. And when someone comes in that's assertive, they really don't have the tools to calm that storm, I think is the best way to look at it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I think they don't, speaking of tools, is there anything that you would recommend for people to be able to like equip themselves with the ability to manage those situations?
Yeah, you just happen to be an assertive communicator.
And then what's the difference? Or maybe you can give an example, like saying something assertively and saying something arrogantly.
Oh, yeah. So I look at communication in one of four lenses. Either you're aggressive, which means you don't really have a good intent for the other person. Your aim is to win. Then you have passive, which is like, I'll be the doormat. Let's just make this problem go away as quickly as possible. And you have passive aggressive, which is usually the most detrimental because you're saying the opposite of what you really mean, which is like, I'm fine, everything's good, when inside you're like very upset.
Boiling.
That
Yeah.
was my go-to. I would give dirty looks and scowls, and then somebody say, "Doctor, is something wrong?" I'm like, "No, I'm fine." Which is like a full absence of communication, because they know the truth, and so it's like a form of manipulation almost. And then assertive, which is just direct. And direct, I think kindness would be like, "Do you mind if I give you some feedback?" And then they'll usually say yes, and then you deliver the feedback or feed forward, meaning this is how I'd like to do things in the future. I'm not trying to correct things that happened in the past, but that all requires that they know you care, because candor in the absence of kindness just seems like you're being a jerk. So trust is the through line that just must be there. You have to earn that, and there's no shortcut to that other than to be values oriented and consistent as a leader. But we live in a very passive aggressive society that's not good with spirited debate. You know, you disagree with me and then you unfriend me and cancel me and all those sorts of things is in vogue now, but nothing good comes out of that. So I think we have to go back to what sort of culture are you creating. I remember every year in my practice, we'd revisit the values and then kind of declare what we wanted our culture to be in the next year. And it was more of to get buy-in again, to remember, to recall. And sometimes they'd eliminate values and add new ones, but I distinctly remember one that they put on the board, which was welcoming feedback. And they didn't just want feedback from me, they wanted to give me feedback, and they wanted the freedom to give feedback to one another. And when that happens, when you have that peer feedback and that peer assertive communication, you've won the game. That's like the ideal culture, because that's high flow, because it's high trust.
Is it hard to scale?
Yeah, it's really hard to scale. I think what we're seeing in dentistry right now is such an ambition to scale that they're losing the humanity and the culture of the practice. So that would reference back to what we were talking about before, what over systemizing. Like, I think the competitive advantage right now is becoming a talent magnet. So how do we attract ambitious, kind-hearted people and give them the tools and training that they need to succeed? To me, that's scalable, but that goes back to flow, which is getting to the biology and psychology of a human being. Somebody I've studied a lot is somebody named Stephen Collar, who's probably the world's leading living expert on flow. And he says personality doesn't scale, which means if it works for you, it probably won't work for me. But what does scale is understanding human biology, like what at a primal level do we need? And in a very divided society, I think the only way I'd ever want to scale a business is by hyper-humanizing it. Because the subplot here is AI, which is going to take away a ton of menial routine tasks. And the only thing left is what's uniquely human. So yeah, I think it's hard to scale and maintain quality. There's a whole nother level of scale that I'm seeing in dentistry that's like, who cares? Just go as fast as possible. But I think the
You're talking
ultimate,
about the number of locations or what specifically?
I mean, not necessarily locations. I would just say revenues. If you're preparing for some sort of consolidation maneuver or sell, I think that's the core motivation. But if that's not checked with how do I sleep at night, you know, I think you and I both know a lot of people that are sitting on piles of money aren't any happier than they were when they couldn't rub two nickels together. So I think you have to be careful of what you're really chasing.
Yeah. And I also like to tell people, not that people ask for my opinion in this case, but we're not advocating for rubbing two nickels either.
No.
Right?
I mean, I think entrepreneurship is a series of very smart investments. Yeah, no, yeah. I think wealth creation is very important, because then you can't invest in your people if you're worried about making payroll. I've certainly been there, but you're not saying, how do I make this person better? You're saying, how do I make sure that they don't receive their paycheck late?
Yeah.
So you have to get out of that scarcity as quickly as possible. And in dentistry, I mean, it's a beautiful business model. You shouldn't you shouldn't be there for long if you're there. So yeah, I think wealth creation is part of it, but it can't be the number one pursuit. If we're talking about scaling, the human side of it would be turning your business into a meaning-making machine that happens to be highly profitable. Because if you try and make it into a profit machine, you pretty much discard the meaning. Because money is like a drug, right? Like you need a bigger and bigger hit to get the fix. And so you're never satisfied. And so, yeah, you just have to be careful to make sure that you're not a one-trick pony and that you're checking multiple boxes simultaneously as you're growing. Because if
What are
money
those
was a
boxes?
solution, you wouldn't have miserable billionaires.
Yeah. Yeah. What are those boxes for you?
First and foremost, is being a father. If I succeed in everything else and fail as a father, I didn't succeed. So that actually is the reason that I shifted from a achievement entrepreneur mindset to a lifestyle entrepreneur mindset. My son's 14 now, which means I probably have him at home for 4 more years. I know that I can step on the entrepreneurial gas like crazy when he turns 18. In fact, it's happening to some degree now because he needs less and less of me as he gets more friendships, more activities, etc. So that's first and foremost. Fitness is something that I neglected early on, and now it's the most important thing for me. How do I manage my energy? I'm about to turn 50, and it's like, okay, at this point in time, I've got one foot out the door, right? I'm closer to death than I am to birth, and so that shifts priorities for me quite a bit. And then I think my spiritual guidance system, I'm still exploring what that really looks like, but there's something inside that knows when I'm on the right track and when I'm on the wrong track and when I should do the scary thing as opposed to the easy thing. So I'm just trying to be a better listener to, I would say that's my highest self. It's kind of like the 90-year-old wiser version of me. It's like, don't worry about that petty stuff. Just,
Right.
it's not worth arguing about. It's not worth worrying about. It's time to take the bold move here. So those are the 3 elements that keep me really grounded and focused. And I'm playing that game really well. I'm really proud of it now, but part of that is because there are periods of time where I didn't play it well, and you feel the pain of like, okay, well, I neglected something that I shouldn't have.
Yeah. If somebody is listening and they're feeling that they're neglecting one of those check boxes, and I mean, for each, it's going to be a separate checkbox, obviously. But let's just say the person was self-aware to recognize that that's the checkbox, or these are my checkboxes, and they missed all of them or some of them. I think it's easy to say, well, once you know, just go fix it. But I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They just go back to their traditional easy or whatever used to, whatever the motion that And what have you seen that really works for people to get out of the what they're comfortable with?
Well, usually it's driven by pain, unfortunately. Like something breaks and they have a wake up call. I've worked with dentists that have cancer diagnosis, multiple, that shot, that all of a sudden that changes their relationship with their team and insurance companies. Like that's a big wake up call. Sometimes it's a pain in the neck or the back where they're like, okay. I mean, I had a tingling, a neurology in a neuropathy in my hand and arm for a while that I thought that I'd lose my career over, that had me thinking about like just basic health and what would life look like if I couldn't practice dentistry. But if they're ambitious and they're trying to optimize their life and they're being proactive, it goes back to a basic habit stack, right? And if you're going to go high leverage, it's like, how do you start your day? Is there some sort of midday routine to recharge and reset? And how do you close out your day? If you get those three benchmarks right, it's hard to really like say that, like the biggest, a great coach named Marshall Goldsmith says the great Western disease is I'll be happy when. That's what we're talking about, of like, when I hit 1 million, when I hit 2 million, like, okay, that treadmill just goes faster and faster and you never achieve that goal. But if you're trying to orchestrate masterpiece days and weeks that you're proud of, you go back to habits. And it's not rocket science. It's nutrition, hydration, maybe some form of mindfulness, get outside, sleep well. And then after that, it's your relationship. So are you healthy with your inner circle, which I hate to say it, it's usually not your family. Usually it's your team that you're spending the most time with. So you have to make sure that you're not allowing any culture cancers in your midst to hijack your vision. And then your support system, and then your spiritual support system, and some people can find meditation through running and weightlifting. I certainly do. That's the answer to the question of what supports you when there's no one else there to support you. And I think you need those safety nets in your life. And if you don't have those structures, it's not hard to install. I think dentists, being ambitious people, want to go from the couch to the marathon, and the reality is like, just go downstairs and swing a kettlebell for 5 minutes, or do some burpees, or like a morning routine. This has been over glorified. You can do a great morning routine in 15 minutes. And if you count your drive time and what sort of nutrition you put in your ears or your mind on the way to work, 25 minutes, you're golden. You just have to make sure that you're prepared for the game that is the workday. Because if you're not enthusiastic when you walk in there, your team, they're going to follow your lead. So I hope I answered your question, but I think those are some basics of usually the reality is they're moved by pain, but if they want to be ambitious, there's some basic structures and habit stacks that need to be installed.
There's a book that I'm reading right now that I have probably the first time I have a relationship with a book where I absolutely hate it, but I keep reading it. Yeah, it's called 4,000 Weeks. It's a time management for mortals. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I have.
And so I'm a driven person.
No.
But I read this book and it's like, it makes sense. But my mind is like, throw it away. Like my inner voice is like, what do you, please, stop reading it. Throw it away. I'm like, nah, one more chapter. Let's keep going. Let's see what's there. And there are a couple interesting things, like to your point, like distractions. They're actually very useful. And if you believe it, right? If not, then not. It's totally your call. And I'm not saying you, like in general for a person, but it's sort of like a guarding rail to make sure you're doing the right things, as far as distractions. I think another part, they actually make fun of like people that are trying to optimize every minute of their time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To the point where everything is optimized.
Yeah.
And it's like chasing unicorns pretty much, because life is life. Things will happen, and just go with it. And then I also listened to a podcast yesterday where there are two of my heroes. Like, people typically in my world, the tech world, don't talk about them because they're anti venture capital, they anti like growth at all costs. And one guy built a company called cdbaby.com back in the 90s, sold it in 2000, Derek Sivers, and he wrote extensive like number of books now, self-published, incredible human being. And he just like talks about doing one thing for a day, right? Or focusing on certain things, or talking about how life is very conflicting, right? So he writes a chapter on how long the life is, and you need to be prepared. And the next chapter is how short the life is, and just enjoy the every moment, right? So then it's all in that conflict. And I heard these two guys, and another guy is in tech, talking about, it's like when you build a software, it's a great business. You don't need to have a lot of people, and enough is enough. Like once you start making enough, you can actually even release some free software for people. But my long point that I'm trying to make is they talked about, like, is there even a point to look at the past and learn something from the past? Because moments happen, decisions happen, like a lot happens in that moment that maybe there's nothing that you can learn from that moment. And then just like as you leave, you get better, your intuition gets better, your gut feeling gets better, like more fine-tuned. It's just like neuroscience pretty much in your gut that tells you and or recommends you what to do. This is not a question. I'm just rambling because I read a bunch of stuff on this and I listened to a bunch of stuff, and you're the kind of person that helps me usually dissect these things.
Yeah.
And my I guess if I would try to frame what I just said in the question is, for an ambitious person, how do you put all that together?
Well, the first part that I heard that's extreme wisdom, in my opinion, is that you're sitting with something that's triggering you, because I think that's where your freedom lies. So take our political situation right now. Pretty ugly, right?
Oh, yeah.
But if Republicans would say, I want take a Democratic friend and say, can you explain to me why you believe that? And they might say, well, I heard it on TV. Or they might have a reason. You don't know how they grew up. You don't know, if they were on some government assistant. You have no idea. And vice versa. So I think if you're looking for, it's human nature to find things that validate your belief. But if you're looking for reasons to bulletproof your belief and you're happy to be wrong, I think that's true wisdom. So I love that part about it. The second part, I think, is the same journey I'm on, and I'm seeing a switch. Like there's a book, I haven't read the book, but I know the works of the author quite well. It's Ali Abdaal. It's Feel Good Productivity, which is kind of along the same world that I'm exploring of flow. Like, what if we just optimize our life for flow? Because this conversation is very flowy for me. I would swear we've been on the call for 17 minutes. I look up, it's 45 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So there's a joy and the pleasure and a release, and I'm not premeditated or orchestrated in what I'm saying. But I think, like there's the third kind of theme that you presented is the surrender. Like life is going to life, like unbelievable tragedy is going to happen in your life, and luck like so glorious that you're like, wait, what's the hook, right? Is going to happen. And that's the journey that we're on. And I can't pretend to explain it, but I know that I've created a lot of pain for myself arguing with reality through my hard times. And it's like, I didn't deserve it. I didn't create it, but it's there. And if I don't handle it, it's going to last a lot longer. So I think there's three big themes there, but the most important is that I think if we open our eyes to opposing views and values, that's the place that we expand. And to enjoy, I'm super ambitious. I don't ever see this shutting off. I don't care to retire. I just go from one adventure and project to the next, and that's really where I get my joy. But for example, I would always tell you that video games are a waste of time. I played some in my teenage years. I never was really a gamer. But now Bennett and I, my son who's 14, will play college football on EA Sports. And it's so fun. We connect. It's flowy. It's fun. We talk smack. We learn a little bit about football. Adding some space for the magic, I think, is something that I didn't appreciate in my 30s that I really grasped on to my 40s. And there's a season for everything. These breakthroughs or epiphanies or paradigm shifts, I think, kind of unpack for their own reason and their own rationale. We all learn them when we should learn them. But there's some truth that our elders teach us that sometimes we can learn from reading a book, and sometimes we just have to learn it from the School of Hard Knocks. And it's all about our journey through life. And I think ultimately what we're talking about is regret minimization. How do we get to that deathbed, whenever it may be, and say like, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how I played the game, as opposed to, I wish I would have. There's research on the regrets of the dead and the dying, and the regrets of the dying. And one of them is, I wish I would have had the courage to live a life true to myself. And so that's kind of a theme that I think all of us should explore. Like, what does that mean? And it goes back to what we're talking about, being adamant. Like, this isn't the everything for everyone practice. It's this kind of practice, and this is the culture, this is the type of people we employ, this is the pace that we operate at. Maybe fee for service, we may be more surgical, etc. That's a choice you get, and that gets defined strictly by you. But if you don't make a decision, then we know what the default looks like. It's the commodity problem that we have in dentistry.
Do you think the commodity problem leads to the growth of the GSOs?
For sure.
How do we stop it?
Sure. Huh?
How do we stop it?
I don't know that you can stop it, but you can opt out as a dental practice owner for sure. Because if you look at buyer behavior, there are going to be some people that want the convenience, they want the low fee. But I remember way back when I was still an army dentist, I was watching Howard Feren's 30-day dental MBA on VHS tape in Germany. My friend sent me a box of all those things, and I was just eating it up. I'm like, okay. I was having a vision for what I was building. And he was talking about consumerist behavior, and he was talking about Mama Bear, who makes most of the appointments, doesn't want to take their kids and family to the lowest bidder. They want to take it it's biological to take your family your family's healthcare needs to somebody that you have rapport with, that you trust, that you can confide in, that it's not overselling to you. So I don't think it's a problem. I think you just have to be clear on who you are. And it seems like if insurance companies aren't going to be willing to keep up with, the typical expenses of business, and I think most businesses their costs have gone up 20% in 4 years or something like that. Dentists are in a situation where they're paying money to see patients, which isn't sustainable, right? So you have the option to be faster or deliver a superior experience. And that's, to me, where the freedom lies I work with a lot of very skilled dentists, and it's clear to me, like, you just have to say, like, you have to do it overnight. You can have a long runway, make it 4 or 5 years, but you can't afford to pay somebody $100 to a crown for them. That business model has never worked and will never work. But if you're going to use the best labs, build the best team, have some ambiance to your practice, that's not Outback Steakhouse. That's more like a Ruth's Chris. So you have to act like Ruth's Chris. So I actually don't think it's a problem at all. It's just being very different about which. It's the lack. When somebody's in anxiety, they're in fight, flight, or freeze. I think a lot of dentists are in freeze, which is actually a toggle between fight or flight. If you want that type of practice, and there's many of them that are 3-day work week, single doc practices, very lucrative, lots of time off, highly compensated team, you just have to call your shot. But these between practices are the ones that really, I think, get hit hardest because their costs are high and their reimbursements are low.
Yeah. Do you see any other, I would say, maybe let me phrase it in the wrong way, but we can get to a better description.
Sure.
Do you think there are any other self-inflicted challenges that dentists create for themselves in order to not continue private practice ownership?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to being a reluctant leader. If you can't lead yourself, you can't lead a team. If you can't lead a team, you're not going to be very good at leading patients. And if you can't lead team and patients, you're not going to lead a very good business. So it's an inside out framework that always works. And when you try and circumvent that system, that's where you see that self-inflicted wound that you're talking about. Because dentists are, we started the conversation with, I think dentists are how people. That's what makes them very good at their craft. But entrepreneurship is a very different craft. And it's based on principles, not methods. It's based on what and why. And ultimately, organizations, particularly small ones, will take on the personality of its leader. So if you're not expanding in your confidence and communication and capabilities, that's when things really suffer, because you're in a low leverage position. And once you can delegate and create a self-managing team, and the doctor is not needed in most aspects, then that's a flourishing business, because everything is optimized. You're optimizing the human to optimize the experience of the patient in front of them. So to me, there's a couple of things. One, they're putting their efforts where it's low leverage, and two, there's a lack of letting go, where that control that makes them good at tooth-centered dentistry or occlusion-centered dentistry makes them not so good at leading a team. And you have to be okay with betrayal. I mean, when you give that much autonomy, eventually somebody will hurt you, and that's okay. It's better than trying to chokehold everyone into proper behavior when nothing really good happens in that situation. But the other side of the coin of somebody betraying you is that you end up with very loyal team members, and some of them have to leave because their families are moving elsewhere. And then you hear from them later, like, I haven't been able to find a workplace like that that's truly invested in not me as a worker bee, but me as a human. So I think that's the big opportunity that most dentists miss, and I think they'll get around to it someday. But it's the central activity in a business. Is how do I? It's really turning. I talked about Your business is a meaning-making machine that happens to spit off cash. The future of leadership is really a coaching organization, because the world is moving so fast that if you don't learn to develop your people, and if there's not a certain agility, I don't know an industry that can survive that.
Yeah, what's the famous saying? What happens if you train your team and they leave?
Yeah.
And then, but what happens if you don't train your team and they
Yeah.
stay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I mean, the leadership is a fascinating aspect because there's so many stories in life of, small teams with the right leader doing incredible things, big teams with a mediocre leader not being able to accomplish, and great leader with a big team doing a lot incredible things. I think it's just human nature that it all comes down to the leadership. Somebody's gonna, take a flag and say, all right, I'm going to be the one carrying it and you follow me, and we're going to get to the right place together.
And develop other leaders as time goes on.
Yeah. I just think that do you believe that for some people it's a nature versus nurture?
No, I think leadership is a skill. I think it's nurture. There's charismatic people that naturally attract others to them, certainly. Yes, for sure. But they're not necessarily good leaders either. To be able to, I think of leadership as being able to unify people. Here's this group of individuals with their own needs, their own issues, their own pains. They're like, every team, everyone is flawed on the team immediately. But how do you take that and unify that so it's synergistic, so it's a multiplying factor of, I make you better, you make me better? I think that's a skill. I know it is on my case because I didn't have it and then I did have it. And in a lot of ways, it was mandated upon me because I live in a resort town and I was going to have a certain amount of turnover. And I was at my breaking point emotionally and financially due to a variety of circumstances. And it just became so clear to me, if I don't create the best workplace in town, this is all going to be on my back. And I don't know that I ever achieved the greatest workplace in town, but it was my ambition. I was really proud of it. We were award-winning small business of the year. But once that became, at first I thought the patient is always right. I must serve the customer. I must serve the customer. That's how my reputation is built. After a number of years, I realized that my team is also my customer. And if I can't build their trust, if I can't create autonomy, if I don't have to be looking over their shoulder or they're always waiting for my decision, then I'm the constraint and I'm the bottleneck. Once I realized that it's far, far, far easier to replace a patient than it is a good team member, then that's when my practice really took off. So for me, it was very much a skill. And it's one I'm still learning. I learn it through coaching. I learn it through study. Now I'm some ways a writer as an identity. And it's like, it's amazing what happens what happens. And it's never by default. It's always by design, because if you don't design it and maintain it strategically, there's always entropy. Something will come in and screw it up. One bad hire, one bad day, one callous comment, and the whole thing could come tumbling down. So it has to be, you really have to treat it like a farmer, plant the seeds, cultivate, water, nurture, and there's no days off there. And you have to be okay with that journey. In my opinion, it's the most fulfilling journey. When I look back at my dental career, I am most proud of the impact I had on the people that work for me, not the people that I treated.
I want to stay on this subject for just one more thing.
Sure.
Do you think that lately there's certain terms have been overused and abused?
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, like where's family? Our
yeah.
dental practice is like a family.
Yeah.
Or I've seen dentists reading or listening to someone and start the morning huddle and say, well, today together we're going to decide what's important for us or what's important for this practice. And I keep listening a lot of times, and I feel like people have the right intentions, but they're not necessarily, like, they're following their own advice. Like someone like Jim Rohn used to say, like, you just bought the wrong plan. Like, just buy a different plan, right? You don't have to be broke and poor. Like, just buy a different plan.
Yeah, exactly.
So then that's what in my head, I'm like, it's not leadership. We're not a family. We're a team.
Yeah.
We're not like, you start a morning huddle, say, I'm so excited. This is what we're going to accomplish this week. And this is how we're going to do it. And I'm so excited for you guys because every one of you is going to contribute so much to this plan and we're going to celebrate together. Like, where is that coming from? Like, where's this overcuddling and overusing the terminology, like, or treating the workplace like it's your family coming from? Like, I'm just, sometimes I can't even explain that.
I think you're spot on. It comes from a good place. That's what we wanted. That's what I remember wanting in dental school when I was in the Army. And some ways it's true, and sometimes, but there's a good is the enemy of great, right? It's better than having a toxic workplace, but there's lots of toxic families too. So that's not a great frame. I've always looked through at business through an athletic lens because my beginnings were in athletics. I worked with world champions, national champions, gold medal winners in the Olympics in undergrad. So I was amongst the high performers, and that's why I take cues from high performance athletics. I actually don't watch that much sports, but when I do, I'm studying the interactions between team members and their coach. That's the best paradigm, because ultimately a business is about results, and those results come from a patient experience. And there's this it's another well-meaning term, but I don't think it's properly framed. It's called psychological safety. It's the driver of high performance. But people get fixated on the safety thing, and it just means that I can check my boss when my boss needs checked without fear of repercussions. That's high challenge too, which is uncomfortable. So we're not talking about a pretty padded room. We're talking about high challenge and high growth. And to me, yeah, you look at championship teams, what do they usually say when they get the trophy? They say this team loves one another, which has elements of family, but there's also elements of iron sharpens iron, which means we collided. I can tell you from working with national champions, there were so many fights in practice. But when it came Saturday to win the ball game, that game was already won before they took the field. And if I was first team and you were second team and you were going against me and you dogged it, you were going to hear about it, because I don't want my hardest day to be at the game. I want my hardest day to be in practice. So my easiest day is at the game. So I know that has to be throttled down a little bit in business, particularly in dentistry, where it is an industry of very kind-hearted people. You wouldn't be in healthcare if you weren't. But I think, going full circle, we're in a world where we have to be highly adaptable. Highly adaptable means high growth. High growth means high challenge, and high challenge means you're uncomfortable a lot of the time. So I think you're right in saying it comes from a good place. I think social media perpetuates a ton of bad advice. I dropped almost every dental Facebook group because I was like, no, you're giving this poor young dentist the worst advice. Not bad advice, but the worst advice. So yeah, high performance teams borrowed from athletics. Unfortunately, we can't see under the hood of a lot of high performance organizations, but a basketball game is a perfect example. It's not my favorite sport, but you can see a leader on the court and off the court in a basketball game. And so I think that's the best lens in which to look through a business.
And on that note, if you would give your final thought for like a dentist that's listening to this, that wants to be the role model, or wants to display those elements that you described, what would be your thoughts, or what would be your recommendation?
One, I think you have to carve out time. So if you wanted to build muscle, you carve out time to go in the gym. If you want to carve out a skill set of being a strong leader and a strong entrepreneur, you have to carve out time. If you think it's going to happen at the end of the day when you're already fried from seeing patients and smiling and glad handing and nice to meet you and blah, 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 that's not your best work. So you have to treat your team like they have their own appointments with you, and you need a strong communication cadence. If anything, in 2024 with all the division, you should do more of that, not less of that, because people are hurting and you need to bring them in close. Secondly, you have to develop yourself. And there's every single idea ever known to man is available for free or low cost via Audible and podcast. So there's no reason to not take in great nutrition when it comes to big ideas like that. And you just have to be very careful of who you're getting advice from. And then the last part would be bias towards action. If you look at a typical dentist, they're going to want to ready, aim, fire. and you have to circumvent that natural ability because most of your lessons aren't really learned until you've tested your hypothesis. So there needs to be a strong bias towards action. So what's important to you will end up on your calendar. If you say you don't have time for it, then you can't complain that you're not getting the results.
This is beautiful. Dave, thank you so much for your wisdom. I think we had like some of the best 5 minutes. An hour just flew by like 5 minutes. So I really appreciate it. I really, really admire your work. And where people can find you?
My new podcast is called Flow Driven Performance. I've since kind of morphed away from Relentless Dentist. I just wanted to speak to a larger audience, but it's certainly all the principles apply to dentistry. It's just more for a broader audience. I'm also fairly active on Instagram if somebody wants to DM me and ask questions or connect. And that's at dr.maloley, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, or send me an email. It's dr.dave@relentlessdentist.com.
Dave@relentlessdentist. Awesome. Dave, thank you so much.
Hey, man.
Hopefully
Thank
I'll have
you.
you again
Thanks for your friendship.
soon.
Thanks for the always fruitful, rich conversation. And congratulations for hitting 100 podcasts.
Yeah, thank you so much with your help. Thanks, everybody.